Okay, over to you.
Great, so I am Millie Duncan, so I'm working with Leeds Climate Commission. I've been looking at aviation and the issue of transport. So globally, aviation accounts for about 2% of the world's emissions. To put that into perspective, the UK accounts for just about 6% of the UK's emissions, and we've been focusing on Leeds Bradford Airport, which is about 1.6% of the UK's emissions. So Leeds Bradford Airport has been expanding since 2000, so it's grown about 2.5 times until now, and its expansion plans expect from its growth now about 4 million passengers to 7 million in 2030 and 9 million in 2050. So with these passenger increase, obviously taking into account Leeds as a city declaring a climate emergency and publishing its science-based targets to get to zero carbon by 2050, this is quite a big issue, and if the airport keeps expanding at this rate, by 2025 the airport will emit more than Leeds as a city. And if the airport does not grow from now into the future, it will overtake Leeds as a city's emissions by 2030. In order to get a handle on these emissions, in the near future it needs to be a big focus on voluntary aspects. So Leeds Bradford Airport currently, people are taking leisure flights, holidays, business and domestic travel is actually quite minimal. So from voluntary to national policy, have a top-down approach on capping flights, especially reducing domestic travel, would have a fairly small impact, but nationwide a larger one. From a voluntary aspect, if people took less holidays, specifically focused on frequent flyers, from Leeds Bradford it's about 16% of people take over 40% of all of its flights, and they are people that are flying 2 or 3 or over times a year. So the frequent flyers become a focal point of reducing their emissions, whether this is through tax that could go into a retrofitting scheme to reduce emissions, through massive tree planting schemes or avoidance. This would be a really focal point of carbon reduction. The frequent flyers tend to be in the higher earning brackets as well, with Leeds Bradford being about 83% of the tax would be in the top 40% of earners, and the lowest 20% will be taxed about 7%. In order to create the big impact that would be required to offset the airport emissions.